Welcome to Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, a podcast by Chefalo Consulting, where we share the knowledge, stories, and resources you need to create a trauma-informed culture that supports wellness, growth, and resilience. I'm your host, Shenandoah Chefalo. Welcome, community members. We're so excited to have you today for what I think is going to be another great episode of our little podcast here. I cannot wait to introduce our guest to you. She has quickly become a friend. I feel like I can call her that. I'm so glad that you're joining us in our podcast on this journey. You know, when we originally started the podcast, we weren't sure would people be resonating with the material, but your feedback's telling us you like it. Little ways in which you can implement trauma-informed into your work and community environments. So on today's episode of Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, we're delighted to welcome Ann Price, who's a seasoned community psychologist and the president of Community Evaluation Solutions. That's right, folks. I listen to you. I'm finding all the data people who can measure the unmeasurable for us, as we all complain about analysis paralysis sometimes. Anne is dedicated to fostering social change and developing equitable community strategies. With her expertise in strategic planning, program evaluation, and data analysis, she has significantly impacted community coalitions and organizations by enhancing their operational and strategic effectiveness. Her career began in therapy, working with adolescents, which spurred her shift towards prevention and systemic change. You probably know I wish she would have been my therapist when I was in foster care. Things could have been a little different, Anne. But to address public health issues at their roots. Her work is guided by a strong commitment to creating inclusive and thriving communities. And I am thrilled to welcome you to our little podcast. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Shan, and thank you for that intro. I'm kind of blown away. You know, it's always uncomfortable when you hear somebody introducing you, but thank you. Thank you for having me.
I feel like it's the worst part of being on a podcast or being a keynote speaker. I know you do a ton of keynoting or workshops and somebody introduces you. And I swear every time someone introduces me, I think, who are they talking about?
100%. Yeah, it's so uncomfortable.
And so just tell our listeners, if you will, you know, one of the things that popped up, I know you have your own podcast as well. We want to be sure we let our listeners know all about that. But one of the things I didn't expect about the podcast, because I'm sort of let's get down to brass tacks. Let's talk about all the ins and outs of the things we want to do. But you know this as much as I do. Trauma-informed work is so much about relationships and so much about connections, that what I've really been blown away with is people's stories too. How did you end up here? Because in school, and I say this almost every time for every guest, whatever your job title is currently isn't in a manual anywhere. That doesn't exist in a pick this job manual. Now, maybe therapists did, but then you transition. So can you maybe tell us, like, working with adolescents, dedicating yourself to that, like, something happened to shape your approach to this work that you're doing?
Oh, yeah. A couple of things happen, right? Yeah, and I love that question. It's kind of similar to the question that I ask on my podcast about, you know, tell me who you are and don't tell me your Vita. Because, I mean, truthfully, nobody really cares where you went to school and, you know, what you wrote your thesis or whatever in. Nobody really cares about that stuff. And I also think it's really true that we're all called to this work for a reason, right? And when I say this work, I mean the work that you and I do, the work we do in communities, the work that social workers and psychologists and public health people do. All of us are called to this work for a reason. Well, you know, I started out wanting to be a cancer researcher, believe it or not. I had a couple of friends of mine die when they were in high school. And then I met college chemistry. And yeah, I decided, I really love the science thing, but the chemistry thing, not so much. I was all about the ologies. Anything that ended with an ology, I was really into. So somewhere along the line, I decided, I want my PhD in psychology. That's the thing, and I want to. And here I'm doing air quotes, help people. Right? Didn't we all say that? Right? I want to help people. So I did that. I started with a little private practice I was trying to get off the ground, ended up working at some treatment centers in the metro Atlanta area. And what I found is I loved working with kids, and they were very ill. I mean, that really is the only word for it. But unfortunately, when you work with kids, they come with parents.
Whew, isn't that the truth?
And somehow, the parents didn't always want to deal with their own issues. They just wanted you to fix their kid, right? So the kid was the identified patient. So I had a lot of kids who were sexually abused or had substance use or a misuse disorder of some type. We had really ill kids. They didn't always come from the metro Atlanta area. And now looking back on it, I realize how wrong that is. But anyway, so the for me, the what really did it was having to escort a young lady back to her home state and commit her to the state hospital. She was 14. I think she was maybe she had a birthday. It's been a long time that she was in treatment with us, but she had had a baby and had abused the child so much, and the child did survive barely. Anyway, we kept her for as long as we could, and then some. I was already pretty disillusioned with the fact that people were magically cured when their insurance ran out. But we had kept her for as long as we could. It was really clear she needed long-term treatment, and it was my job as the lead therapist to escort her back on a plane to her home state and commit her to the state hospital. So, when I say I can hear her still screaming in my ears, "Don't leave me here," I mean, it's still hard after all of these years to think about that. So to me, that was it for me. Like, surely there has got to be another way. Why do we wait until these kids are so unhappy and self-harming? Yeah, so I found community psychology, and community psychology is all about community change. We're all about prevention. We're all about, equity, inclusion, long before it became the thing everybody talks about. We were all about systems level change. So yeah, that was the shift, Shen. That
Yeah, so I understand why this event happens and you're like, "I can't do this anymore," or "This isn't." But how do you go from that in helping people on such a personal level to moving further upstream, right? Because that's what you really did. It's like, I don't wanna be the person putting the Band-Aids on. How do we move to find the tourniquets or do the surgery before people need, right, all of this stuff? How do we move further upstream? So what drew you to wanting to consult with communities and coalitions then?
Well, it's just that, right? It's that idea that what folks struggle with is not necessarily only about them and their individual issues. Yes, that's a big part of it, we absolutely need to be in touch with our own trauma in order to do this work. But it was really clear to me if things were going to change, then what we call policy systems and environmental change had to happen, right? Because people only have so much control over, the things that happen to them, but the things that surround them are really, very impactful. And that's what community psychologists are all about. So, and when you don't end up in an academic environment, and I was pretty clear that that is not what I wanted to do. Most community psychologists gravitate towards evaluation because you got to have something to sell, right? We all have to have something that we can make a living, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Well, and I
that's
think yeah, I'm just gonna tell our listeners, like, so we met at Root Cause Coalition, so we'll give a small shout out to our favorite little SDOH there working on social determinants of health. Not so little. We know it's not a little problem, but we love Root Cause Coalition. And one of the things that I talked about there and you talk about in those settings are we know that prevention is a huge word. You and I might say a buzzword sometimes, for systems change, but what do you think are the biggest or most common challenges that you encounter when whether it's an organization, a system, a community is like, "We gotta change the way in which we work."
Probably the biggest, you know, I don't love the word challenge, right? When you're working in communities is helping them understand systems change. Just let's just start there, right? Well, what the heck? What do you mean systems, right? You know, what's wrong with the systems that we have? People just need to
We've
like
been doing it a long time
right.
like this.
Right. Or, well, we have education. People just need to like take advantage of their education, not being aware that the education system, for example, doesn't work for everyone, right? Or that we had things like, redlining that determined where people live, for example, or being aware that certain races are more likely to be arrested for doing similar things or have more harsh punishment. We see that in school settings as well. So it's those kinds of things that people don't really get, like, right, because we look at the house through our individual window.
Yeah,
We're
our
not.
implicit bias,
Yeah, for
right?
sure, but, oh, well, even that word, right? That immediately gets people's, hackles up.
So how do we help leaders overcome that resistance? Because I think we're in a political climate where, to your point, sometimes even the words are like, "You can't say that. We can't" right? Which is a big hindrance to prevention work. It's like because those same people will tell you, "Let's do prevention work," but then when you start saying the words, we get a little like, "You can't say that here." And listen, this is coming from someone who there's states that I can no longer go work in right now.
Oh, I wanna hear more about that.
Well, listen, my slides have to be approved through an approval, and there's words that I can't use, and frankly, if I can't use words like diversity, equity, inclusion, I can't do trauma-informed work. Like, one can't exist without the other, right? Like, I can't and they're like, "Well, just take those slides out." It's like, well, if I take the slides out, we're not being ethical to the framework. Like, that is the framework. Like, one doesn't exist without the other. So we can't talk about prevention. For me, I'm sure there's people who feel like they can, but for me, I feel like I can't do that. And I'm just wondering, how do we help? Because it's not just that. People have resistance for all kinds of reasons, of course, but how do we help people overcome the resistance to doing the change?
I love this question. And first of all, shout out to you for living with integrity, right? Because, you gotta sleep at night. The way I try to do it is, people resonate with stories and metaphors. So if we can help them recognize their families, themselves, and other people's stories, I think that's really helpful. So any kind of metaphor is always really helpful. I'm a real big believer in I talk a lot about because I work mainly with community coalitions and community nonprofits. So I talk a lot about don't have meet and talk meetings if you're a coalition. The kind of coalition meeting where people say, "Hi, I'm so and so, and I'm from the public health department. And, we're doing vaccines on Saturday. Hi, I'm so and so, and I'm from the school system. And we have a family literacy night coming up." Hi, right? You know what I'm talking about. And people just go around the room, but no work gets done. So I'm a big believer in like facilitation and getting people up and moving and making sure they're having fun and the fun is the work, right? So there's always a piece of work in whatever we're doing. So we slip in education along the way, but the way we teach it is through an activity. So one activity that I have been doing for a while, and I totally got this from my friend Falami Prescott, is we do an activity called Building a Thriving Community, right? So I have a lot of toys that I bring with me. So I have Legos and I have my kids, little dolls, and I have things that look like medical things and things that look like school things. And we often start our work with folks with this activity. And I simply just say, hey, using these toys and the kindergarten art supplies that are over here, I want you all as a group, and we break folks into small groups, like 5 or 6 people maybe. I want you to build a thriving community. What would it look like if you built your ideal community? And they go at it. And it's always so interesting what people come up with. So they spend 20 minutes doing that. We do a gallery walk, right? And the insight is amazing. Like somebody came up with one a couple of months ago, and it was they were gonna have they had like a town center. A lot of them did have like a town center, so services were centralized. But somebody had like an edible garden. Like nobody had to go hungry because all the landscaping was edible and they had a community garden. It was beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. So getting people to imagine what that community would look like. And I never had to say race, equity, diversity, inclusion. It was implied. We named it and claimed it after they developed it, after they envisioned it, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So now my listeners know why I've invited Ann Price to be on this beautiful show, because I know we have people listening right now who are trying to do TIC community work and who are going to those meetings and that you're describing. My name is, please come to the vaccination clinic. My name is, please come to family. I know we have people doing that and they know there's a better way, but they just don't know how to get started. And so I think, but your idea of this build an ideal community, I want our other listeners, if you work in a court system, if you work in child welfare, if you work in, what happens at your next team meeting if you say, what would it look like if we built an ideal working place? What would it look like if we built an ideal child welfare system? What would it look like if we built an right? Like what happens to just that ability to get into our creative brains, even if we can't do any of the things we built, right? Your group probably after, I don't know how long you spent with them, a half a day, a full day, whatever it was, nobody went out and planted an edible garden, but getting us into that creative space to think about the what if helps us, right? Decide where we're going in this complex social place.
And that's exactly where we take them after they envision this ideal community, is through a process where they actually, all right, of all of the things, what's actually doable for us, right? Right. And how are systems working in our communities? Well, we have like 10 folks all doing the same thing. That's probably not a great strategy. Or families have to go hither and yon for services and we make it so difficult, or we only let them go to the food bank once a month, right? I
Yeah,
mean, we
I've
have
heard
all sorts of like
no, I've
crazy
heard that one a
requirements.
lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So we take that fun but deep like activity and then take them forward. Now, what are we going to do? What feels doable? So strategy development, theory of change, and then we also got to get practical, like building the coalition and boring things like bylaws and work groups and other things.
Yeah. I mean, it's both, right? It's the exciting stuff and the not so exciting stuff. So in your experience, and what's like the keys, if you will, because there's probably more than one key factor that makes a successful coalition.
Oh my gosh. There's so many.
I know. But what do you got? You got 2 or 3 for us that you think are really big ones.
Well, you got to start with leadership, right? Transformational leaderships. I know a lot of lovely community people, and some are leading coalitions, some are leading collaboratives, tomato, tomato. But having that transformational leader that is kind of like Joan of Arc, right? They've got the flag. Everybody follow me, right? They're inspiring. They make people want to, do the work, right? And I, as an introvert, you can relate to that. That's so not me, right? But I know it when I see it. I mean,
But you just said something there. I know it when I see it, and that's what I want to encourage some of our listeners is like, if you're not the transformational leader, that doesn't mean you can't be involved. But also, if you've somehow found yourself leading the group and you're not that person, can you step down and put that person there? Because that self-awareness is huge. Because many of us, people tap us and say, "Can you do this?" And Anne, I know you're a recovering rescuer, a fix-it person like myself. And so we say yes, right? Yeah, of course I can do it. Of course I can lead this group. Of course I can do that thing. And so I think there's many listeners who have found themselves sometimes and then it's like, "Wait, I might not be the best." How do we also encourage them to step down to get that transformational leader? Because I think I'm thinking of people in my brain where I'm like, "You're an amazing leader, but you shouldn't be leading this."
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I d yeah, I went to a conference one time and their suggestion was to, what they call plaque them, like, hand them a plaque that says, "Thank you for your service." I personally can't imagine ever doing that. Term limits, people. Put in your bylaws. Have term limits. But yeah, kind of getting back to your question about what are the couple of things. So I would say, transformational leadership who have the right people in the right place, right? And then the thing that we already talked about, which was no meet and talk meetings. And then I think the third thing is like implement an action plan, right? So you've got the great, you did your ideal community, you develop your theory of change or your program logic model or your strategic plan, whatever. But then you actually have to do the work, right? That work has to get like filtered down to committees or work groups. You got to have leadership. And then the meetings become the work. How are we doing on moving our mission forward? It's not a networking event where you go around the room like we already talked about. It's we're moving that mission forward. And oh, yeah, I'm an evaluator. I have to say, evaluate it, right? How are we doing implementing our strategy? So I would say those three things, right? Transformational leadership, and doing the work and then having those great meetings.
So for our listeners and all of my folks on here that are part of a core team that I left you, this applies to you too. I'm just telling you this applies. Everything Anne's telling you applies there too. So given the diverse needs of communities, and especially the communities that you're working with, is how do you ensure that the action plan, that the strategic plan is inclusive and equitable?
Well, the first thing you do is make sure that the folks around this proverbial table look like the community, right? So I've done a lot of work with drug free coalitions, for example, and those are youth substance abuse prevention programs. It's been around for, I don't know, 20 years probably. And I've worked with many, and I walk in the room and there are no youth at the table. They're not considered part of, yet they are the focal population. We try to get away from the word target population these days for obvious reasons. So focal population, right? They're not even in the room. And the idea of being creative about how to get youth involved isn't even brought up. So the same thing applies to any other community. If your community is blessed to be a diverse community, then whatever your community organization or coalition should look like that community. If it's all the professionals around the room and no community members, then, that's a problem.
And you can't make a decision, can you, if you don't have the lived experience in the room? Because I think that's true even when I watch leaders say, "Hey, we're gonna, do the way we do intakes," and then I'm like, "Can we have some of the intake people?" Right? Like, we do this to each other all the time about making changes even though we don't have lived experience doing that specific job or using those specific services. So it's a big piece.
Or the intaked people.
Yes.
What is that? I just got off the phone with, and we were talking about like the customer experience journey or the community member. What would it look like if, oh my gosh, we talk to kids in foster care about what it feels like to be in foster care and what it feels like to be taken from one family to another. What would our services look like if we actually talk to the families that were involved?
Well, and I say this because people call me all the time and say, "Shen, can you introduce us to youth in foster care that are younger than you because you're too old now and you don't know." Can't your experience doesn't matter. And I'm always super cautious to do the introduction. And one of the reasons I'm super cautious is I've watched that used to try to drive an outcome as well, right? Like we only want to talk to youth who have this to say, or we only want to talk, right? That are kind of pushing a mission. And I talk about this because I sat on a lot of panels, especially early in my career. And if I tried to be critical of the system in any kind of way, even though people knew the system was broken, the panel's here to talk about what we can do to fix it. But people would say, "Oh, like, can't," like, you'd get the look of like, don't talk about that piece." Or I would talk to youth afterwards and they'd say, "Well, they said I could only talk about the good parts of foster care or I wouldn't get my $25 pizza card."
What the fudge?
Right? Right? And so there is this, I do think that that still exists, and this gets into a little bit of the data that I wanna talk to you about, which is, 1, I ask Anne this question every time, by the way. How do we measure the unmeasurable? And 2, how do we ensure that all voices are heard? Because in this instance, like, if we're like, well, I don't even feel safe to tell you what's wrong, so I'm just gonna tell you what I think you want to hear. It's not good data in the first place, right? But then we run with that data sometimes and make decisions, even when people aren't safe to share the data. So I'm just wondering, I know this is where you spend your world talking about these things, but how do we measure the unmeasurable? And then how do we make sure the data is really inclusive and that the underrepresented voices are in that data?
Well, I don't think it's that much difference than, looking around your coalition and making sure that your coalition is representative of the community. I mean, the same applies for data, right? Where are you getting your data from? What kind of data are you collecting? Right. So we at my company, CES, we use mixed methods. I can't think of any evaluation that I've ever done that was not and by mixed methods, I mean quantitative and qualitative data to really kind of wrap around and tell that's the stories. And my field of evaluation is just so all into community voice right now. There's so many amazing ways to collect information from all of those kinds of people. So it's just a matter of doing, some checking. I think we have to think about the questions that we ask. And oh, by the way, let the community help you design the evaluation. There you go, right? But I want to go back to the measure the unmeasurable. What would be unmeasurable? I'm really struggling to what would be is it hard when you work in communities? Yes. Is it hard when problems are complex? That's why we have a theory of change. That's why we have a logic model, right? That's why we have strategies, because we have an idea of what might work. And so our evaluation is tied to that vision. And we're really just kind of measuring our vision. We're not saying we're like, I am contributing to world peace, right? We're probably not doing that, but we might be doing this little piece over here. So I can carve out this little piece and I can tell the story as
And I
best
think
I
that's what
can.
I need our listeners to hear you say, because I think a lot of times it's, well, how do I measure if people are safe in our community? How do I measure if people are safe at work if I work in a very specific system? How do I measure if people feel better, right? Like, what does that mean? Because well, we'll just take safety, and I don't mean physical safety, like what is the crime rate of our community? I mean, am I psychologically safe? Am I emotionally safe? Am I supported in the ways that I need to be supported? And I think that because that means what you need for safety, Anne, is very different than what I need, right? That we get into this. How do we measure if we've had an impact, like in something like that? Are people? Is this a good workplace culture? Is this? I think that's what the people that I'm running into are like, how is that? And what I've been drawn to saying is, does it feel different here? Right? Like, now that's not a data point that Anne's group is measuring, but that's what I mean when I say, how do we measure that unmeasurable? Is there a way? And I think for you, there is.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many, like I said, qualitative, community participatory approaches, right? So, the usual suspects are surveys, but there's so many other kind of creative ways to collect that information. So, the other usual suspects are key informant interviews and focus groups, but there's also, outcome harvesting and customer experience, journey mapping, journey scrolling. Oh my gosh. We've been doing
I
one.
feel like everyone listening is gonna call you after this because I know they all have data. They're like, "Yes, I'm writing this down, and how do we get that
Well,
going?"
I'll tell you this one from, and I learned this from one of the younglings on my project. I love her. Shout out to Sherilyn. So we've been doing this in some schools that we've been at, and it's just a feedback corner. So we have little post-it notes, and we have two very simple questions, and people can fill out the post-it notes and stick it up there and answer the question. And then we had another question about like the event, whatever it was, the literacy event or whatever, and they can use beads or pasta, whatever, and they can just drop their answer in the little jar that represents the remark. You could totally do that in an organization or a nonprofit. You could have a little feedback corner that's, kind of off to the side where people could drop in their little feedback about, an
Such a
example.
simple way, right? It's such a simple
Right.
way. So let's talk about because in communities, in coalitions, it's complex. It's not just a singular work environment. Now you're talking about multiple agencies, and it becomes quite a complex stakeholder landscape. So, how do you manage and align those various interests and visions of different stakeholders in a community project? Do you have tricks? We want all your tricks.
Oh my gosh. Well, let's start with it's not easy. I keep going back to that vision, whatever that vision process that you have, the community's got to be part of creating that vision and then implementing the work plan. And then a big part of it is just training people on what do we mean by collaboration? What does that even mean? Right? Because collaboration is not easy. It's a lot easier just to do the thing yourself or to not talk to community folks, right? And then you can appreciate this. We do a lot of letting people know what to expect, shall we say, right? Expect turf guarding, right? Expect conflict. And, throw in a little trauma informed approaches. Folks, when you feel your hands sweating and your stomach in a knot and, things are not going well, be aware of where that might be coming from, right? Then we do things like set up agreements about how we're all going to work together and what principles are we going to operate by so that we know how we're going to handle, the road ahead because it's going to be rocky, right? And it never fails that once a coalition or organization, I'm sure you've seen this too, they work through remember the old norming, forming, storming stuff, right? That's so true, right? No sooner did they get to that, place where they're kind of bubbling along and you're like, yes, they're great and I'm great. Something's going to happen, right? Somebody moves or you lose a leader or they lose funder or some instance happens in the community, something's going to happen. And then they're kind of back to like square one. So we do a lot of training on kind of, what to expect and how to treat each other. And
Yeah, so I heard something really interesting there that I would pull back to one of the slides I teach on collaboration, which is self-awareness. Where am I in this moment? Which is all that stuff you're talking about. Toleration, because in any relationship, in any coalition, you're not going to get your way 100% of the time. And you're not going to like everybody 100% of the time. And so, especially as an introvert, I don't like anybody most of the time. So it's like right. I feel like I'm always tolerating something. So what am I willing to tolerate in this space? What am I willing to let go of? And then also what's our accountability to each other, to the community, right? Because it's balancing for me kind of those three plates all at once a little bit is what I'm hearing you say.
yeah, that's why I think those agreements and those principles are so important because that's what we touch base. And that's why I think that the trauma informed work that you do and some of other friends that I have do is so important because I know I'm just speaking for myself now. When I feel my stomach being knot or I can feel my throat's red and I've gotten to the age, thank you God, that I can like go like, oh, this is not this moment. This is touching something like way back then. And what can I do to like kind of ground myself and do the breath work and do all of those kinds of things. And that's what I meant when I said like we're all called to this work for a reason, right? I think many people like have trauma in their past, and the more we can be in touch, and that's
Well,
what you
listen,
teach on.
trauma is
Yeah.
universal, right? Trauma is
Yeah, for sure.
universal. I haven't met the human that hasn't been overwhelmed in their life.
True, but I don't think we know what to do about it, right? If you grew up like I did, Shen, where it was like if you're gonna cry, A, I'm gonna give you something to cry about, or B, go to your room, right? It's really hard to kind of stay in the moment with that conflict or whatever's going on in that organization. So it's really important that we get
Listen,
that training.
owning our feelings is what the millennials and Gen Zers have been asking us old folks to do for a minute now, and we've been fighting it. But yes, we gotta own our feelings. But you're so right, Anne, because those of us who grew up in those conditions, and I know it's many, many of our listeners, it's hard now to say, "Oh my gosh, can I share a hard feeling?" In a professional setting, especially.
I don't think we know how to do that. That's why I think where
That's what
you
we're
step in
training. Yeah,
is so important, because then what
we can
happens in
roll it.
organizations and in communities and in the world we live in right now is people take their toys and go home. I quit, or I can't stand that person, so I quit. It's really hard to stay in the moment and kind of work through that.
So I'm looking forward to asking you our quick fire questions. But before we get there, tell us about you see anything on the horizon, like emerging trends or innovations that are coming that are influencing community consulting and coalition building? Anything you're excited about?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm excited, and this probably isn't the answer that you're looking for, but I just did a whole, I was on a workshop yesterday on AI. What the heck, right?
We've been talking about it a lot on the podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's, that is not only coming, it's here. And I feel like, yeah, fun fact that when I went to AEA a few years ago, I remember there was like all these sessions on AI. I'm like, yeah, I don't need that. I'm not going to any of those. Right. So I think that, that's it. I do feel, really hopeful. I think we're all going to get there in terms of working
So
together, but
tell
it's
us about your AI. You're concerned, you're hopeful, you got a little bit of both. What's your take on the AI trend in the realm that you're working with it
well,
in?
in the realm that I'm working with, it has a lot of implications for how we collect data, for how we analyze data, data privacy. As a business person, what are some things that I need to think about? It's not really a concern. It's just like, oh, yeah, I need to learn, more about this next thing.
Yeah, because more and more people are just asking ChatGPT, "Tell me what the research says about," right? And it's telling us.
Yeah, that feels a little lazy to me.
I know, but but I can feel where funders, politicians are gonna be relying more and more on that, right? And then decisions are gonna be made on that.
Well, ChatGPT is fun. I played with it a little bit, but it's not the only game in town. So I don't know whose AI is best. I don't know. That's beyond my capability. But
Alright, so looking into the future then, what are you hopeful about in terms of community psychology and public health and social issues? Give us some hope, Anne. What's the hope?
yeah, my hope. I have a 25-year-old, so my hope is in the 20 to 30-year-olds. And I know they are a stressed out, bunch of folks. I understand that, but I got a lot of hope for those kids. Some of them don't feel very hopeful right now, but I'm very hopeful that they will bring us to a level of collaboration and appreciation and just love for everybody else, whatever
I love it. I
those
love that
folks
you're
are.
excited about the youngins. I am too. I hear some, like, mumbling sometimes, and I'm like, "I can't wait for Gen Alpha. I'm so excited."
Yeah, I think they will change the world.
I
I
think
think
so
they will
too.
change the world.
I love that. Alright, we like to do some fun questions, but you can answer from fun, from personal, or from professional. We'll take either. What's the latest book or TV show you're watching, reading, and why is it standing out for you?
I On Audible, I have, oh gosh, what's the name of it? The Kitchen House.
Mm.
And I'm terrible with authors' names. Ugh,
That's
sorry, I
okay.
don't.
We're gonna put a link anyway. We'll
Yeah,
put a
I
link.
don't I don't know the author, but I'm listening to that on Audible, and then on my Kindle, I have Braiding Sweetgrass. Yeah, and they both resonate because they're about, one is about an Irish girl who was brought up on with slaves that were working in the kitchen house, and I don't know what's going to happen to her. And then Braiding Sweetgrass, of course, is about indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing.
Love it. Love it. If you could have dinner with a historical or contemporary leader, who are you choosing? But what is the one question you must absolutely ask them before dinner is over?
Oh gosh. I'm gonna go with Michelle Obama.
She's been popular lately.
Oh, really? Isn't that so funny? I don't know if I want to ask her. I think I just want to ask her anything. I just want to listen to her. I just want to.
I know, but you're
I
a
don't.
data expert. I feel like there's got to
Yeah,
be
no,
one
there's
thing
not
you
a
want to
no.
ask
There
her.
wouldn't be a data question. um, yeah, just I don't know. Probably something about just being a mom.
I love that. What's filling you with joy? What's the hobby or activity that's filling you with joy? You lose track of time when you're doing it. What's giving you everything right now?
Oh, definitely cooking. I'm a big foodie. I always tell folks, follow me on LinkedIn. We have a company Facebook page. Don't follow me on Instagram because all you're going to see is the food I made or the food I ate.
Now it makes me want to follow you on Instagram.
I have like I have a couple hundred that I'm following, I think, and I have like 22 followers. Like, and people like will connect and like, I don't know who you are, and you don't want to see what I made for dinner tonight. You really don't.
We might. And it's always a delight to spend time with you and have you on the show. So you just said you can follow you on LinkedIn, Instagram for food pictures. How else can folks get a hold of you? What do you have coming up? What else can you share with everybody to connect with you and learn more about what you and your work?
Yeah, well, the best place to find me is our website, communityevaluationsolutions.com. We have tons of free resources there. I just launched a new digital course for nonprofit and coalition leaders. So that's there. We're excited about that. It's like half off for the first 10 people who register. We have lots of free resources and tools as well on the website. So that's probably the best place to reach out and find me.
And plug your podcast. You've got your
Oh,
own
yeah. Oh, there's
podcast.
that. Oh, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, I have a podcast called Community Possibilities, and I interview really community leaders who are doing the hard work of social change.
So go out, like, love, follow, and Price's podcast while you're there. You can always like, love, follow us as well. We appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure. I hope I'm going to run into you in person somewhere soon. But until next time, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For our listeners, thanks so much for sticking with us for another episode of Mindful Management. And remember, slowly, we just take one step at a time. We can do hard things. See you next time. Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, CHEFALO, consulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. And remember, change happens one step at a time.